So, welcome to the first ever episode of the Paddock Talk Podcast with your hosts, me, Taylor, Joe, and Nat. The topics we're going to be covering today are Hamilton's contract, the new proposed sprint race format, the engine freeze, some track changes, and taking a look at the proposed EA acquisition of Codemasters.
Starting off with the major news that everybody following F1 would have seen over the last few days is that Lewis Hamilton has finally put pen to paper on a new deal and he will drive for Mercedes this season. It ultimately completes the lineup in F1 from the driver perspective for 2021, and it means that Lewis does have the chance to go for a record-breaking 8th Drivers' World Championship and try and eclipse the 7 that is currently tied up with Michael Schumacher. Realistically, only Red Bull can mount a challenge to the Mercedes team this year, and based on the past few seasons, it does not look likely that they'll be able to do so, to do anything to stop the Mercedes dominance we are currently in. Therefore, the main story regarding Hamilton's contract extension that we will be discussing tonight is that the fact he has only signed a one-year deal. Usually, Lewis has typically signed a 3-year extension, but on this occasion, it's just a 1-year deal, and that's also the same as his teammate Valtteri Bottas, meaning both coveted seats on the market for Mercedes will be available in 2022. That ties into the time frame of George Russell's Williams contract coming to a close, and he is largely tipped to fill one of those seats. 3 into 2 simply does not go, so what do we make of Mercedes' 2022 driver options?
I think a lot of people obviously wanted Russell in the seat this year, but you can't just get rid of a 7-time world champion. I mean, it's ridiculous the way some people just dismissed him. But I think that it's going to be difficult because I don't think they're going to want Bottas as a team leader with Russell, and Hamilton is the perfect person for Russell to learn off as well. But it just brings in so much more uncertainty now with this 1-year deal.
Yeah, I think obviously the fact that it's only a 1-year deal obviously makes it quite interesting, really, because it has a lot of question marks as to why it's only a 1-year deal and not possibly a 2 or 3 year deal. Obviously, Russell's contract coming up at the end of the year, I think Mercedes would be quite mad not to bring him into the Mercedes fold for 2022. I think Bottas is, although he's a very dependable driver, he's not one that could probably lead a team, as you said, to like a title, really. Hamilton, it's just uncertain about what happens for 2022 of him. But I think one way or another, I don't think Bottas is got a long future ahead of Mercedes.
No, I agree actually. As a Russell fan myself, I would love to have him in the car as right now. But just for his development, I don't really think a year alongside Bottas would really help him as much as a year alongside Hamilton would. And from Mercedes' point of view, throwing in Russell to partner Bottas when you have the record setter that is Lewis Hamilton on the table, it's just not really a viable option when you look at it from their perspective, because there is the chance that if they have a bad season, which could generally happen, Bottas, what didn't set the world alight last year that much, there could be the chance that if Russell struggled to settle in with the team, that Red Bull could sneak a championship in, which they don't really want. Obviously, they want to protect this unfathomable run of dominance that they've had.
Like the Sakir Grand Prix was undoubtedly the worst thing that could have happened to Bottas. Not only did it make all the fans question him, it also made probably his team question him. And if it'd be interesting to see if that race had happened before Bottas got his contract nailed down, would Mercedes have kept Bottas on? Because I agree with what you all said, that Russell would undoubtedly learn more alongside Hamilton for a year than Bottas. But if Hamilton does walk away next year, they're left with the prospect of a Russell-Bottas lineup. And the major curveball for next year is the fact the regulations are coming in. Will they want 2 new drivers together? Probably not. It's probably going to have to be Russell and Bottas. So they're going to have to pray that Hamilton does decide to stick around.
I think Hamilton will probably stick around for 2022 because I think he'd want to see in these new regulations and see what the cars are like. Because I think in the media as well, he's shown quite a lot of approval of the new regulations coming in. However, I do think if he does go, I think Mercedes, with the position they're in at the moment, obviously top of the constructors, they've dominated the series since 2014. I think they'd be quite mad not to use that sort of power they have in the sport at the moment to look outside the box, maybe look outside that Mercedes sphere. Because at the end of the day, if a team, if a driver he's on the market or whatever, and Mercedes come knocking at his door, they're not going to say no. Mercedes will at the moment are top choice for pretty much every single driver.
It's the most coveted spot in motorsport. If Mercedes wants to drive for you, you'll go in. But I'm pretty sure Verstappen would have break clauses in his contract. Vettel had them at Red Bull, and he was a 4-time world champion. So the likelihood is Verstappen has them. But whether Mercedes would want to go through the ordeal of having a Verstappen-Russell lineup could be like the Hamilton-Rosberg dynamic. Who knows? Is unknown. So that's why probably if Hamilton does walk away, regardless, they're probably going to put Russell in that seat. I think we can all agree on that. Russell, it would be stupid to give him another year at Williams, especially at the back. He needs to be in that Mercedes for 2022.
Yeah.
And it's a decision, Hamilton
definitely.
or Bottas.
Yeah.
And you're always going to pick Hamilton. But if Hamilton doesn't want to go, Bottas has to stay.
Yeah, I think the issue is, though, what Mercedes want to avoid is sort of a Seb Leclerc style dynamic where Seb, and in this case Hamilton, is the established team leader. They have sort of a wingman, someone who's never really going to challenge them in a Kimi or a Bottas. And what will happen is Russell might come through and he'll start disrupting that establishment. Like with Leclerc, Leclerc sort of unsettled Seb a bit, and it took a while, not a while, but obviously the first few races Seb was ahead, but then he started getting that preferential treatment. And it's like with Ricciardo and Max as well. Ricciardo felt he was getting unfairly treated, and so he left. I think they don't want Russell to come in and sort of start taking away that sort of limelight from Hamilton, and sort of, because Mercedes have said, and Toto Wolff repeatedly have said, they very much enjoy the dynamic between Bottas and Hamilton because it's a very safe, stable dynamic. But when you see things like Hamilton alone could have won the Constructors' Championship for Mercedes this year or last year, that you have to get Russell in, really, because Bottas is such a safe bet that you're not getting any money on it anymore. Like that's what we've come to.
I think, going back to when Taylor said about the Sakir Grand Prix, I think that's also sort of a bit that really shook Bottas, because he was in not really that much of a good run of form at that time anyway. He had the Eiffel Grand Prix where he was beaten by Hamilton after leading for the opening portion of the race. He made a mistake which led Hamilton to be able to overtake him. Race as Imola, where he was struggling for pace for up until we had the safety car from Max Verstappen's tyre failure. Obviously, that was down to that bit of Ferrari carbon fibre stuck in the car, but that's still quite a big thing, because at the time he probably didn't know that, and nor did Mercedes until they actually saw it on the car. Then you had Turkey after Imola, which was obviously a disastrous race for Bottas. At a time where he really could have shown that he was a team leader at some stage, with both of the cars being in the mid-pack at the start. Instead, he was, the established commentators made jokes about his driving that race because it wasn't up to the standards that someone in a Mercedes should be doing. And then obviously Sakir came around, and he looked at the start, it's about 0.2 between him and Russell, and then it got lower and lower and lower. Russell then matched him, then was comprehensively beating him before the debacle happened. I think that has really played on his mind, and if he wants to prove something to Mercedes, he actually has to act on it now, because this is the most important year of his career. Because this could decide,
make or break.
Yeah, this could decide if he actually has a future in F1, I think, because outside of Mercedes, there's not really any other bet for him to go.
But I feel like we said that every year. We said that every year.
This is his fifth year. This is his fifth year, and he's ever had more than a 1-year contract. That just
exactly. And every year he comes up strong, and it tricks Mercedes to thinking, okay, yeah, he's changed, and then he gets the contract, and then he's absolutely rubbish for the rest of the season.
But I think it sounds like I think obviously take that into consideration. But I think with the fact that Verstappen's only getting stronger with more experience he gets, Red Bull are now much more stronger as a result anyway with the acquisition of Perez, which is very good for them. But I generally do think that this is a make or break year for Bottas, because Russell has shown what he can do in that Mercedes on a short notice. I know this.
Yeah, and also there was never beforehand. There was never a replacement. They never fully trusted Ocon. Now
Yeah.
Russell's coming to the end of his Williams contract, and like that's probably one of the reasons. I'd imagine Williams wouldn't let him go, so they have to pay a fee. Why would you pay a fee for nothing when you've got someone who can be a good second driver? Whereas now
Exactly.
Russell will be free. He can come back, and they've got that ready-made replacement.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think in terms of Verstappen as well, I think 2022 is probably a bit too early for him. I think, especially because Red Bull have basically done everything for Verstappen. He is their absolute number one. Without him, they're pretty stuffed. And with this Honda deal, which we'll get to later, and the engine freeze, that is perfectly lined up for Red Bull to remain competitive. If he jumps ship to Merck, I don't think that'll happen until sort of maybe 2024 or something. Much later on. I think right now they're trying to get
It'll be
him.
post Hamilton.
Yeah, exactly. He's the Hamilton replacement, but only if Hamilton goes in a few more years rather than right now. Right now, I mean, if Hamilton walks away at the end of the season, I think that Russell will be there with Bottas. I mean, that's for later on. But yeah,
just like when you look at it, it's with the Russell situation, it's a bit of a difficult one to really predict what's going to happen because he got the short end of the stick when he came into F1 out of the 3 people that were promoted that season. And since then, he's done very well with what he's been able, what he's had, really. Comprehensively beating his teammates every single qualifying session, which obviously that is generally the match of how good a driver is over one lap. Then in the races as well, he's been consistently, especially this season, last season, mixing it in with the Haas's, sometimes Giovinazzi or Raikkonen if the Alfa Romeo wasn't quite working too well. But he's hungry for that Mercedes seat because he's seen what he can do in it. He knows what he can do, and he knows that Bottas has faltered a little bit. So he really does want that seat, and he's going to try everything in his power to get it. And I don't see any other way of him not getting it, really.
We talk of a fine line for Bottas, a make or break campaign for Bottas this year, but it's also make or break for Mercedes because they're now reaching that fine line where keeping Bottas is the safe option. He delivers the Constructors' Championship. What more can you want? You can't he can do more, but as a team dynamic, you can't do more. But now they're crossing that border where it's like, okay, we've got to start considering our own future. Like, how long do we delay Russell just to keep this Hamilton-Bottas partnership? It's
exactly.
It's like a
Bottas
football
now?
team.
He's in his 30s, right?
Yeah, he's like 31.
31. Yeah.
It's like a football team, like Liverpool, for example. Their team's growing old. They've not replenished it, and they might hit a sharp decline, or they are in a sharp decline now. Merck, if it gets to the point where they delay Russell too much, he might either leave, or if he doesn't leave and gets put in the seat in another year, he might not be ready. And by that time, the domination might not be as big. They might have a closer competitor because McLaren and Aston Martin are on the rise. And then suddenly that driver difference makes a huge difference to their actual points tally.
Oh, exactly. When it comes to crunch time, like we saw in 2018, he finished 5th and he got 0 wins. Yes, he got unlucky in the first half of the season with a few times like in Baku or Bahrain or China. But when it comes to crunch time, time, and if there's an actual title rival, Hamilton's not getting any help. Like, if you even look at Silverstone 2018, he was meant to do a solid job, and he fell back. And then, like in Hungary as well, his response was hold Vettel up and then just career into the side of him. Like when it comes to that, when the pressure is on, and not just him versus Hamilton. Oh, I beat him by 500ths in quali, and he just about beats him or whatever, or Hamilton has a bad day. Russell can easily do the same job as him. And if you look at if you go back to history and look at some of the classic number 2s, like at Ferrari, like an Irvine or a Barrichello, they at some point they go, okay, if we keep this driver, nothing's really is going to change, but we might as well change it, just to get a bit of a fresher environment. Like when they got Barrichello, they said, okay, Irvine's not bad, like he's not terrible. I mean, he didn't win the '99 championship, which
he should have.
Which he should have done.
In their eyes,
with their very good '99 car, and they went, all right, well, he's not terrible, but Barrichello is slightly more exciting, so let's get him in. And it's the same thing with Russell Bottas. Bottas, yes, he's not a bad driver, but he's not amazing. He's not good enough where you think, yeah, we really need to keep this guy. And you've got a really exciting talent in Russell.
Yeah, I'd say as well it's the best time for Russell to come up as well because obviously you got new regulations coming in next season, the major aerodynamic and all the major changes that are coming in. Everyone's going to be on a clean slate, as in the drivers. Obviously, they've going to be totally unfamiliar with the cars, so there's not really much of a better time for Russell to come into that team when everyone else is sort of in a similar position, going into the complete unknown with these new cars, and obviously. It should be quite a smooth transition, really, because obviously he's already had
I was
the
utterly
experience.
shocked that they didn't. I was stunned when they fair enough. Bottas won the opening race in Austria, and then they announced him straight after for the year. I was stunned they did that. I thought, to me, but obviously I don't see all the data that Mercedes have got. Obviously, we can't say the decision was wrong or right. It's up to them. But from my position, or from my opinion, they should have had Russell see how it developed. And if they would have seen how it developed, they would have seen Bottas's decline throughout the season. They should have had Russell in the car for 21 ahead of the regulation change. Give Russell a year to bed in alongside Hamilton. They'd have won this year's championship anyway, probably. Unless Red Bull pull out something miraculous. And then you got Russell adapted to the car for 2022.
Like when you mention. Yeah, well, when you mention his when he won the first race of the season, it's like that's a common thing with Bottas. Is he has some races where he is a really good match for Hamilton, and there are some times where you think, okay, maybe he might actually do something a bit better than before. 2019 he started off with a very good opening race of the season, an incredible strategy he made work there, and then faltered. After about Spain, he was almost matching Hamilton. They were trading wins each race, and then we got to Spain, and then Hamilton obviously kicked up that extra gear and really stretched his legs. I think Bottas can have those races where he can match him, but he's just never going to be. Obviously, he's not there to be matching him week in, week out, but he has the tendency too much to let things slip, and I think. Even though he has that tendency, Mercedes don't really want to get rid of him because of the scared that Russell might actually be a bit better than what they think. But obviously, they don't have the data that we don't have the data that they have, so we can't really go and say.
I think a good point to end this topic on is so if we go around, what do we think Mercedes 2022 lineup's gonna be?
I think it will be Russell and Hamilton.
Safe bet.
I'd probably agree on that one as well with Russell and Hamilton.
I think it's the common consensus.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, but I could also see a tiny change, and maybe it'd be Russell. And say Hamilton has a shock retirement, and Bottas also gets replaced by Russell, and they don't bring him back. I generally could see Ocon there because he's still managed by Toto, and Toto pulled a lot of strings to get him back into F1 in 2019.
I'd say
for this year. And we saw at the end of 2020 he was improving, and I think with a year under his belt, which is always difficult to come back to when you've had a year off, especially in F1, you've had a year off. He did nothing the entire season apart from a couple of tests, and to come back, and he actually was quite all right, got a podium in Sakir, and was very, very comfortable come the end of the season. I think that if he has a really good season in 2021, and they do get rid of Bottas for Russell, and then Hamilton has a shock retirement at the end of 2021, I generally do see Ocon in that seat. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think it is the other alternative.
Definitely, it's definitely possible. I agree, yeah.
All right then, so with that topic done, we're now going to have a look at the F1 Commission had a meeting earlier today. So we're recording this on a Wednesday, and one of the main things they talked about was verbally agreeing with a quote broad consensus to trial a new qualifying format, which is expected to be a sprint race at some point at some Grand Prix in 2021. So a group has now been set up to finalise the details of this plan, with a final vote expected to be at the end of the month. There's also mentioned that there's no chance of a reverse grid element. That was shot down at the end of last year. And the weekend format would now look like this. So on a Friday, it would have FP1 in the morning, and then qualifying taking the normal qualifying format, taking the FP2 slot. And then on Saturday, some people think there might still be an FP3 in the morning, but not really confirmed yet. And then the sprint race would be in the qualifying, where qualifying would normally be in the afternoon. And then Sunday is the main race as usual. And there's also sort of talk about how the support series is going to sort of slot around this. But that will be discussed at a later date, I imagine, when the final proposal comes up. And it will take place, they're aiming at Canada, Italy, and Brazil. And it requires a supermajority vote, which means 28 out of the 30 votes, which is across the FIA and the F1 teams, needs to be approved. But it is looking fairly likely at this stage that it will indeed get approved. So what do we think, guys?
I don't know with it, really. I think it's obviously designed to create more unpredictability, so we have more results like Monza and Sakir. But I don't think it's really going to improve the racing product. A positive to it could be F1 fans for years now have been really asking for more meaningful track time across a weekend. 3 practice sessions people have been saying is too much, and I think reducing it to maybe 2 or 1 is good. And then having a qualifying plus an extra race, that sells more tickets because it's more of a spectacle. But from an actual racing product standpoint, I don't think there's going to be that much of an improvement because it's just like a baby Grand Prix on the Saturday. Maybe if they implemented it more in 2022 and the new cars are really good, then yeah, I'd be all for it. But I just don't really see how it's going to be that good with the 2021 cars.
Yeah, I think following on from that, I think obviously it as you said, obviously it gives more meaningful track action because obviously from my experience of being to Grand Prix weekends, having 3 practice sessions, it can be quite boring. You get like a whole day dedicated to just practice sessions, and then a Saturday, which is another practice session, and a qualifying session, which goes quite quick. So I think in the regard of like for people who are actually at the track, I think obviously having a sprint race on the Saturday is quite good. The only problem is, however, is that I think the racing's going to be diluted because the fact that it's reduced points on the Saturday that are being reported, the fact that it's reduced points, I think that everyone's going to be driving a bit more conservatively, thinking about the Sunday's main race. No one's going to be kind of risking themselves to gain loads of positions, unless obviously at the back of the grid where they've got nothing to lose really. But I think for the most part, at the front of the grid, there's not going to be a lot of action because everyone's just going to be thinking, not hold ground.
Yeah, I think on that first point as well, and Joel's point as well, actually, about spectators. What one of the things they mentioned is that you get a main event on every day of the weekend format. So on Friday you have a big, you have the main qualifying event, and then on a Saturday you have a race, and then Sunday you have another race. So I guess from that perspective, it's better for
sells
like
more
said,
tickets,
for fans.
isn't it?
Exactly. You have a must watch event on every day. So in terms of
like a festival type thing, isn't it? That's what I'm trying to do. It's like a racing festival, but it's just one series, which is quite a good idea in some regards.
In terms of broadcasters will have to have a Friday thing now, but people are working I guess on a Friday, but with these or at least with 2 of the races, Canada and Brazil, they'll be they'll be in the evening anyway. So I guess that would work. Maybe that's why they picked those races. But
and then obviously Italy's just to trial it if it for the European time zones to see what it would do.
I think Italy needs spicing up anyway.
Yeah, Italy does need spicing up. But it's like you said, like the people watching it might be at work or something. I think there might be a little bit of a dip in viewership figures because of that. on certain days. I think if you look at like if there's like a qualifying viewership figure, I think that it might go down a little bit because of the time zone. And from my own experience, when I've gone to Grand Prix, there's been years when, because of school, I've had to go only on Saturday and Sunday. So I've gone over on the Friday afternoon after school at like 5 o'clock or something to Silverstone, and then I've been there for Saturday and Sunday. It's like you've missed qualifying at that point. But you still obviously then the upside is you then get 2 races to look forward to, which
Exactly.
it balances
Like
it
an
out
F2
a
or
little
F3.
bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I have a couple of positives, but then mostly negatives. I'm quite against it. Obviously, I agree with what you said about for the people at the track. It's brilliant. There's one less free practice session. There's they get more product for what they're paying. And I'm glad they're trialing it. It's like unlike the elimination quali in 2016 where they just threw it in from the start and hoped it would stick. At least they're actually trialing this, so fans can kind of get a gauge for what they feel about it. Then the FIA and the promoters can decide, right, is this a good thing or not?
There could be sort of more of a build up towards it as well. Like we're
Yeah.
doing Canada this week. Let's see what happens rather than doing it on 6 a.m. in the morning for European viewers and not having the last 4 cars come out in elimination qualifying. Like that was just a total disaster.
Waited all winter, and then there was just 2 Mercedes on track at the end, and that was with 4 minutes to go. There was nobody on track. It was like a
abysmal idea.
Yeah. But in terms of the negatives, and I think there's going to be quite a few from all of us. In terms of qualifying, I kind of find that it just makes the actual Saturday qualifying we have now a bit redundant. So it kind of takes away from the spoils of, so say Turkey, for example. Turkey was quite a tipsy-turvy weekend. Stroll got pole, the Mercedes were nowhere. But instead of having that as the grid for Sunday and give us an exciting race, it would give Hamilton qualify like P7, didn't he? Or P6 at Turkey.
Yeah.
It would give him 2 shots at climbing the grid. So he could end up starting on pole for Sunday. And they would just completely take away from the fact that Mercedes struggled in qualifying, and we want to see them fight their way through on the Sunday. Also, we get 2 races of like action. It just takes away from like drivers who have a bad qualifying because they can make it up in the second one, which in a way is a good point, but then also it's a bad point.
Yeah, I think with obviously, I think another thing I don't like as well is that I think with a sprint race, usually with a sprint race in like other series, there's usually some kind of twist to it, say like a reverse grid or something like that. The thing is I see about the sprint race that I just think as well, like obviously in the spectator part, it's obviously great, but I think for a sprint race, it's just a bit pointless if you're not adding anything different to it. I think obviously there was word about the reverse grid races. Obviously, there was lots of talk after that with when Gasly won at Monza, and it's like even though people say like it takes away from the sort of authenticity of it, in the same way, having a sprint race, the point of a sprint race, realistically speaking, is to add something that you're not going to get on your actual Grand Prix. So I'd have rather have had them maybe do reverse grid races for the sprint race than have a qualifying session for the sprint race, because I just think a sprint race is now just a bit of a smaller Grand Prix, so it's just a bit pointless.
Yeah, and the argument as well for less track time. So yeah, they're getting rid of practice sessions, but you're now going to have a third distance race where you're going to know way more about the compounds on high fuel in dirty air, which could make the strategy even more boring. I mean, Brazil, Canada and Italy are already one-stops, I'm pretty sure, but it's still that idea of you're just letting them have more track time, and like I think Taylor or Job was saying this, you're essentially just going to have less. You're going to take away from qualifying because, like Taylor says, if someone has a bad qualifying session, or we could even I've just thought about this now, but it might be tactically used to take an engine penalty, because if you qualify last in qualifying and then you have a sprint race, you make up 10 positions, you're now starting 10th in the race. So
the fresh engine as well.
With a fresh engine, exactly.
Imagine,
so
like Mercedes would do that happily.
Or Red Bull love an engine change.
Yeah.
So they could be doing something like that.
By Sunday.
Interesting though that you do say about engines. I was just thinking, because they've now got obviously the Friday qualifying, then a Saturday race. what will that do for the reliability of the engines? Now, F1 engines now are very reliable anyway, regardless. But what is it? Was it like last season? Was it three
Yeah,
components? Or
it's like
something?
2 or 3 now.
Yeah, which is, especially when you got, what is it, like maybe a 23, 22 race season, where there could be, in the future, there could be maybe a sprint race every single weekend, or half of the weekends are still an extra 11, 12 races maybe, that could put strain on the engines, not to mention you'll have a Friday run where if they bring back engine modes, there will be higher output of power, which means more stress on the engine. Then they'll have another race where they'll have to deal with overheating engines and stuff like that because of traffic. So there could be the chance that the sprint race on Saturday might not actually be that good because they will try and just be safe and make sure that the engines doesn't nothing happens to it. Because if it happens in the sprint race, you're in a very bad position for the Grand Prix.
And especially as well because with the new engine mode ban, you have to have one mode throughout the whole weekend. You know, I guess maybe, you know, if you have a bad qualifying, you go, okay, we need to turn the engine up though. But then actually no, because you have to stop it before qualifying. So you have one practice session to sort out your engine mode, and then if you have a bad quality, you could be stuck there because you can't turn it up to 11 and charge through the field. So, I mean, the main thing is we don't know until it happens, which is why they're trialing it. Because if it doesn't work, okay, we won't do it. But if it does work, okay, maybe we could look at this in the future. But it's a lot of hypotheticals at the moment.
Yeah, hopefully it does work out, because I think credit to F1 recently, they are like pushing the boat out a bit, trying a few new things out.
Yeah,
and I can give them credit for that, to be fair. But I'm happy to see them like actually trying it instead of going, yeah, no, full season we're going to do it. So at least if it doesn't go to plan as you say, they could just drop it and just kind of go, yeah, we were wrong. But if it goes right, we go.
One point I don't think we brought up is that we might have brought up, and I might have been completely oblivious, but to me, it devalues a race win if you have 2 chances to win. So, like Gasly and Perez, their wins were special because usually those things don't happen. It's like once in a blue moon. But their win was special. Whereas if there was 2 races a weekend, yeah, okay, it might still be a really rare occurrence, and Hamilton might win both races, or a Merc or Red Bull. But if you win on a Saturday, there'll be no ecstatic post-race celebrations because you've got a race on the Sunday. For me, F1's the pinnacle, and it should be about the drivers building up to one sole race that weekend, and that should be the main event. And okay, their argument is we want better racing, so we'll put 2 races on, but they need to accept that not every race is going to be brilliant. The answer isn't just to put more on top; it's just
or just an equal better.
Yeah. Like we're going to get and the main problem at the moment is the cars, and hopefully 2022 will solve that. But the actual format is fine. It's like qualifying didn't need to be changed, and they messed with it because they wanted just to mess with something for the sake of it. They don't have to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously we've kind of covered most of the bases on sprint races, so I think obviously now it's obviously to the next subject, which is about the engine freezers.
So on the engine freezer, so again, earlier today in the F1 Commission meeting, F1 stakeholders have unanimously agreed to implement an early engine freeze. So under the existing rules, it was set to start in 2023, but now it's been brought forward a year, so it'll be frozen in 2022. And it allows manufacturers to still have an opportunity to update their engines for the increased percentage synthetic fuels for this for 2022, and this has opened the door for Red Bull to take over the Honda engines, which I'll get to in a minute. And there's been no indication of the balance of performance. So this was sort of speculated if they wanted to make it so sort of have equal engines, like completely equal engines, it could have been done by increasing fuel flow rates. But with this news, it is sort of confirming that Ferrari are confident, and Honda, I guess, are confident in their engines being much better, because obviously Ferrari would have never agreed to this if their engines were as bad as 2020, because that'd just be suicide. And also in the meeting, there was also mention about a driver salary cap, but that's not been confirmed yet. For maybe another day, that's a topic. But it means that the next generation of engine, which was originally meant to be brought in 2026, that might also now be brought forward a year to 2025. And their focus is, and this is a big quote for this new engine, is environmental sustainability and social and automotive relevance, fully sustainable fuel, creating a powerful and emotive power unit, significant cost reduction, and working on the attractiveness to new power unit manufacturers. So that's what they're aspiring for, I guess, and we can talk about that quote and dissect it. But just going back to Red Bull, their agreement, which was verbally agreed pretty much as soon as, not as soon, but quite soon after Honda announced they were leaving, Red Bull did have that initial sort of verbal agreement. It is very likely now that they will take over the Honda IP and that engine, because Honda do actually have a new engine for this year. And so Red Bull will be taking over their Honda's Milton Keynes plant, and also expanding their current campus to have a section for the engine. And so that's good news then for Red Bull.
Yeah, definitely. That should, well, it will indefinitely keep them in the sport for the future, which is what F1 needs. We need more teams, not even less, especially one that is right now the only threat to Mercedes.
Yeah, I think obviously with the engines being kept in, or the engine free, should I say, sorry. Obviously, I know Honda for this year developed a whole new sort of engine design, as are Ferrari for 2022. If they're obviously not going down the BOP route, well, hopefully that obviously means, as you said, that they're confident that their engines are up to spec as that of Mercedes and Renault, who've probably at the moment the two clear runaways in the engine game as it stands. And obviously this sort of like window between now and the new regulations coming into effect for the engines, they've just got to kind of make sure that the engines are like obviously as close as they can, really, and there's no sort of, because the problem is now they've put themselves in a corner where you can't now have a clear engine favourite, as we've seen with Mercedes in the last few years. That just simply can't happen for the next few seasons, because there's obviously nothing can be done to get closer to that. So hopefully, if it was to be that bad, the FIA or F1 or whatever, they'd step in and go, yeah, then put on the BOP, balanced performance.
Yeah, we're not as bad as we were in sort of when the turbo hybrid era did come into effect in 2014. When Mercedes were clear favourites. I think, especially before Ferrari were banned essentially from using their 2019 engine. They were very even. Those four manufacturers very even, and obviously Ferrari have slipped back a bit. And Mercedes have probably taken a little step forward. But in terms of, if you just skip forward a bit to the new engines, they say that they want to be environmentally sustainable with social and automotive relevance. They want to work on the attractiveness to new power unit manufacturers. But that's what the 2014 engines were meant to be for. They were meant to have social and automotive relevance and be sustainable. And yes, they're the most efficient hybrid engines, ever, or not on the market because you can't buy them, but yeah, out there, the most efficient hybrid engines out there. But I just think that they've proven that they're not relevant enough for someone like Honda. They're not really relevant to the motoring industry that they have to have them. They're too different. And also, the one brand that they have attracted with these new regulations, Honda, have left. So
it's quite underwhelming, for
Exactly.
sure. I reckon the FIA quite underwhelmed at how the response was. I think when they did originally join, I think the main people that they had in mind joining was obviously Honda. Obviously, I know there's a lot of talk about Volkswagen joining, but I think obviously that just
Audi
sort of
and Porsche.
that faded away, obviously, with all the Dieselgate and so on.
I don't see Porsche or Audi ever really joining F1, because when Porsche were lasted in F1, it was a terrible thing. I think they were in like the 80s. I think they did engines for like Arrows or like March or Leighton House, and they were terrible engines. So I think Porsche are very much sticking to what they believe and can't exactly blame them.
It's certainly a topic to keep an eye on, because obviously we've not heard the full story yet. This is only the first few steps into it. So I think we have a discussion on the calendar and track alteration discussion.
Yep. So obviously this season, as we saw last year, there was a lot of changes to the calendar. So a lot of tracks come in, standing in, such as Nürburgring, Portimao, etc. So obviously the first thing really is we've in the F1 meeting today, there's been confirmation from F1 themselves and the FIA that Portimao is set to return for the 2nd of May. I believe it's filling in the gap that Vietnam had. Obviously that track's coming back, and I think it's been quite a positive response to that, because the race last year, I think there's a lot of concern about the quality of racing there, but I think it did pretty much prove us wrong. Obviously the start of the race very hectic. Carlos Sainz took the lead very, very early on, then had a substantial lead before the tyres eventually got into their groove, and Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton comfortably took the win. So I think it's going to be quite a good thing. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I quite like the Portimao track. I think the main issue comes in turn 1. It's a bit like Hockenheim turn 1. It's very difficult to follow. Like we saw Stroll get hit. Maybe some of his fault. Maybe some other drivers being a bit silly as well. But that turn 1, they do actually have. They do actually have
side by side through that though.
Yeah, Perez and Ocon showed that they could do it just. But I think there is an alternate. There is an alternate turn 1 layout which maybe they could use, and also they were very strict on track limits as well. So I think maybe, or even just even if you just extended the curb or allowed them to go a bit wider, it'd be fine. But yeah, the race was fine. I would have preferred Mugello. I think that worked quite. I think that was slightly better. Obviously, had a lot of crashes, but that wasn't why it was good in my opinion. I think it did actually prove it could have good racing.
Turn 1 of Mugello is very, very good for racing.
Yeah,
yes,
it's a very good spectacle.
And the F3 race around Mugello was incredible. So I would have liked to see Mugello. I mean, it might still come in. Monaco, for example, is that going to happen? Baku,
probably not.
Yeah,
I think the super subs from last year might be coming back as well this year. Yeah.
With Portimao, I was actually surprised by it. I was not looking forward to it at all. I tend to have quite a pessimistic outview of tracks that come into Formula One, because there are some in my opinion, some very bad ones in the current calendar. Portimao was announced, and I was like, not exactly a big fan of it, because it's a bike circuit, in my opinion. It suits bikes much more than cars. It's flowy, it's got drops, it's got rises, it's everything a bike would want. But to my surprise, it was actually a really good race in comparison to what I was thinking. Qualifying was exceptional. Seeing the cars bomb it through some of the corners was incredible. The race, the start of it was really, really brilliant. We had obviously Sainz running off with it for a bit. Raikkonen had an incredible start from his low starting position, and he was battling with the Mercedes, I'm pretty sure, at one point. And once everything died down, obviously, we had the usual Mercedes run off, but I don't think any track really can stop that, just because of how good Mercedes are. But the midfield, again, did not disappoint. It was incredible. We had Stroll having his charge up through from like P10, P11 to about P7, P6 before his accident happened with Norris. We had some brilliant racing between Perez and Ocon and Raikkonen and I think Sainz.
Sainz had a charge, didn't he, at the end?
Yeah. They went
Gasly as well.
Yeah.
Gasly had a
That was
charge.
Gasly, yeah.
They went side by side. I can remember Perez and Ocon and Raikkonen and someone going side by side for almost the first 2 sectors completely. a proper, reminded me of like 70s. That I think there's a video. I think Gilles Villeneuve fighting someone in I think Dijon in France or something, and it just reminded me of that because the cars are side by side going up and down these rises, and it was just a beautiful advert for F1. I think
it's a fantastic track, really. I think there's not many tracks that spring to mind that have like such differing undulation changes. Obviously, I know one track that instantly comes to mind is Knock Hill. And it's
I don't
just
think we're going to be seeing F1
undulation
around there
is
anytime
amazing.
soon.
I'd love to see that though. It'd be great.
I think they'd take off at turn 1, to be honest.
Yeah.
In terms of Portimao though, I thought it did surprise all of us. I think the one criticism, apart from turn 1, the one standalone criticism, it was too busy to pass on that main straight. They need to move the DRS
DRS is too overpowered.
Yeah,
a bit further on. That straight was a bit too long, and the DRS is enabled a bit too early for them.
DRS usually does you can see when it affects a car, but on the onboards on that, it was like they clicked into like 9th gear or something and had like a rocket strapped to the back of it. They were flying down that front straight, which then led to obviously the accident with Norris and Stroll. But I don't think that could be blamed to DRS being too powerful. I think that's just a bit of a misjudgment, but it was a contributing factor to it. So I think, as you said, just move it up. It doesn't have to be that much. Can it be like 100 meters, 150 meters from where it is now, and it will still do a beautiful job because I'm pretty sure there's like a notorious headwind that goes to turn 1, from turn 1. So pretty much, no matter what, it will punch a massive hole in the air for cars to follow.
Yeah, so from tracks that are coming onto the calendar to now discuss a track that will not be on the calendar.
Yeah, Rio de Janeiro. Obviously, that was confirmed last week to be called off, or not called off, but obviously the construction plans that had initially been laid out, that's been canned. I think it was obviously set to come on either, I think it was for next year, 2022, they were trying to get it in for. But there was a lot of opposition towards it, most notably by Lewis Hamilton, who was strongly opposed to it, because obviously it involved building over forests, which is obviously not a really good look for F1 if they're trying to promote sustainability and then you're building an F1 track on a big green space. Obviously, the good news that comes from that obviously is that Interlagos stays, which is obviously a very historic track for F1, and it does provide pretty decent racing. It's one of the better tracks on the calendar, I'd say.
Yes, I don't think there's really much to say on it. I think we're all happy that it's not going ahead into Interlagos because that's tradition.
Yeah, I would have liked the change just for the change, but with the reasons behind it, I'm very happy that it's been.
It's not the worst track to stay.
No, Brazil isn't so bad that you have to destroy a rainforest and put
exactly.
there.
I think if they still had the old Rio circuit, I think like Jacarapulco or whatever it is, I probably absolutely botched that name, but they still had that track around. I think they got turfed over in like the mid-90s. If they still had that around and could expand on that, then yeah, I would be down to them trialing it for a season or two. But to destroy a rainforest in Brazil of all places, just it isn't. It's not a good look, and it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So moving on, obviously there's been a lot of other new little minor track alterations that have been in the pipelines for this season. Most notably, obviously, the Spain, which just had its Turn 10 redesigned, which I think it's sort of now emulating what the old MotoGP circuit was a few years ago, where it's a much more sort of flowing left-hander instead of obviously the quite abrupt one that we all know from past years. I think it's not going to make much difference to Spain. It's quite a dreary track as it is for racing. I think it might add a bit more flow and a bit more interest to it when you're watching on board. That might be a bit more satisfying, but I don't think it's much more to really add on that, apart from the fact that it's just, not much really improvement to make to it.
It's going to be even more difficult to overtake in that corner now.
Yeah.
The only way you're going to improve Spain is to get rid of the final chicane, and they won't do that because of safety grounds. So it's going to stay as it is.
Yeah, I think when they announced that they were doing those changes to the final set, I was like, oh yeah, finally we're going to get rid of the chicane complex that we don't need. But obviously that's going to stay because, especially after the fatal accident of Louis Salom in Moto 2 from I think 2016, that's going to be a permanent fixture for the track layout now. I don't see really F1 ever using the double rights how they should have been used, just because of how quick the cars are now. So
And I think for testing, Barcelona is fine, but and I know why it's there, because they have two huge Spanish drivers, and so commercially it makes sense to have it there. But surely there's somewhere else in Spain where they can have a
Aragon.
Grand Prix.
It's a bit like France, where there's so much presence or so much heritage for that country in F1 that they have that on the calendar.
Yeah,
but the circuits
they picked the wrong
just
track.
aren't good enough.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say Aragon's good enough. It's just about like it's the best of a bad bunch.
Yeah.
For F1 purposes.
On the subject of France, obviously there's word as well of them having obviously their tracks being resurfaced. I don't think obviously by the time F1 comes around, I don't think it'll have that much of an impact as it did in tracks like Turkey and Portugal, where they did the resurfacing the week before. So I don't think there's going to be much change on that regard. It does say that they're doing some minor alterations to some of the profiles of the corners, so it's going to be a little bit more smoother in some areas, because I think obviously one complaint from drivers a few years ago, I think it was, is that there's quite some significant bumps in certain parts of the track. So I think they're trying to iron those out, especially in areas such as Turn 5 and Turn 7. It's nothing much really significant, but obviously it's something worth touching up upon. And then obviously lastly, got Australia, which is probably the most significant stuff that's in the works apparently. Obviously Turn 1 and Turn 6 are meant to have their tracks widened, or the road widened or track, which will hopefully make it more easier to race side by side. The Turn 9 chicane, that looks like it could be on its way out and just be replaced with just a straight line towards the fast left-right chicane. And then as well at Turn 13, there's also word that there might be an adding of camber into that corner, just to help the overtaking opportunities.
It's funny you mentioned the Turn 9 bit of it, because obviously for us, we can't obviously drive a Formula 1 car in real life around Albert Park. So when you're on like a game version of it and you get to that point, you see there's that other like section of tarmac, that like there has a wall that points at it, but you can use it as like a cheat code if you're running late in qualifying or something. You can just cut across it. I think that's what they're going to try and do with it. That's what it sounds like.
I presume so. That's the only kind of alternative you can imagine, especially like a quick fix if they're doing it this late in the year.
I think they're going to try and straight line it.
Yeah,
but I think
it's going to be a long straight down there.
Yes,
a really long straight.
Exactly, and then they're going to be arriving side by side.
Maybe side by side. To probably the best section on the circuit.
Will they put a fourth DRS zone in? Because I mean, the other three kind of make sense. Or will they get rid of the one after the fast chicane?
I'd say they'd probably get rid of one and just maybe move it, if anything.
Yeah.
I think they might add that, but not have it as like a fourth zone. Keep it as a so they have it coming out of the chicane where the sector 1 split usually is, and you go around and you get to a certain point, DRS is open, and then obviously then it will you have to turn it off before the very quick chicane, because there's no way you're going to survive through there with the DRS open, and then open it back up again. But I think they could sort of implement it that it's like one zone, but it automatically turns off before you go when you get to a certain point. It's like a control line.
They're profiling the corners before that to get the car to make the car be able to follow each other closely, and then you're going to have really long curve straight because it kind of curves off right. And then it'll curve off right again, and then go up towards the far chicane. It's going to be a really
which then also curves left as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be it'll be a bit like Hanoi. You got like the curved roads of Hanoi.
No, I don't think it'll be that long.
No,
I'm not that long.
I'm not talking about how the length, like the way like they've got a lot of curved straights around Hanoi, and in the final sector especially, it's like you got like that flat out part that curves. It'll kind of be like that, but obviously wider, and the barriers won't be as close.
Yeah. I say fair enough, because the track layout at the moment, at least they're trying something. Why is it Turn 1 and Turn 6? Is it going to make a huge, or Turn 3, or no, Turn 6? Is it going to make a huge difference? Probably not, but at least they're trying. And also as well, they're trying to make the pit lane wider or something. They're going to get rid of the grass. As you saw, Ricardo hit
Ricardo's
in
going to be happy
2019.
about that.
Yeah, they're gonna remove that, I think, to try and make the pit lane wider, which will allow which will allow the pit limiter to be higher,
80 kilometers per hour.
to try and encourage.
Yeah.
To try and encourage
60 miles an hour?
It's seen a lot of changes that pit lane.
Yeah, to try and increase the amount of stops to make the pit lane delta to make it shorter. So a 2-stop is more favourable.
And they're also resurfacing the entire track layout for the first time since it started hosting the Grand Prix in 1996.
That's quite a major. That's quite a major change because
that's 25
it's public roads as well. So it's gonna be quite tough.
Anyway, so you know how I think it's Taylor said it. You've got France and Spain, like, heritage in motorsport, but they've got not that good of a bunch of tracks for F1. Australia fits into that category so well.
I'd agree,
because they have iconic tracks in Australia. You've got Bathurst, which is obviously the most famous one in Australia, but then you've got other tracks like Queensland and Winton. But none of them are good enough for F1. There's maybe one, it's called The Bend. But again, I've seen the layout of that. I've seen races on that. It's good for touring cars and GTs, but it's just never going to be good enough for F1. So they're forced into racing at Australia. Not Australia, but at Albert Park. And to change it like this, with this dramaticness, they're obviously vying to keep it on the calendar for years to come.
I don't think every race needs to be a massively overtaking race. Like for the first race of the season, at the Melbourne venue, it has very, very good vibes to start off the calendar with.
I agree.
And as well, having it at 5 a.m. It's fine because it's the first race. If it's going to be like it is this year in November, it might be a bit more of a struggle. But yeah, I mean, as well, that's going to be pretty much summer time, and which make it could be very, very hot, and they already have it just at twilight, just as the sun's coming down. So they can't move it any later. So it's it's going to be interesting.
It's a bit of a stupid comparison because of the two completely different climates, but it's like when they had Silverstone this year, much later than usual, in the middle of a massive heat wave, and you saw the effects that it had on the tyres. We had a tyre failure 3 in the same race, didn't we? We had Kvyat's tyre failure, Beckett's, which resulted in a rather hefty shunt. Then
that was more curb usage, though. That wasn't. That was.
Yeah, it was more curb usage, but I think was it the two Mercedes ones was down to a mixture of curb usage and also how hot the track
and
was.
Sainz as well.
And Sainz. Yeah. So there was 4 in that race, and there's at Silverstone there's not been that much of a. It wasn't even that much big of a controversy compared to 2013, but which was pretty much down to the same type of thing. But it's very much a worry for especially a track like, in Australia because of how hot it can get sometimes in Australia during their summer.
I think one final thing to take away from the track talk is that you got to remember these alterations aren't for 1 year; they're for the future. And I think it's interesting that we say that Australia doesn't have many good tracks for F1 yet, and that's the same with a lot of countries like France, Spain, but they have a lot of good circuits for other series. So you've got to take it with a pinch of salt that these cars they've not been the best they are in F1. They're probably one of the worst for the racing product. So,
but they're not the only thing that exists for these tracks.
Yeah.
Especially for Albert Park because they do.
I think 2022 onwards is like the better judge to judge these changes. I know 2021's potentially the fairest indicator of whether the changes have worked.
Yeah, definitely. It's obviously still with Albert Park. It's like it's one of the. It's a weird one because it only has like 2 or 3 support categories, and it's Australian ones. And it's literally, as you said, it's such a fun atmosphere because there's non-championship races. I think for the Australian series, and it's their chance to show themselves with a massive crowd. And for us, we're getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning. And even if it's going to be a boring race, it's still such a good feeling to wake up at that time and know F1 is back. So if there's an added bonus of it being an incredibly good race, I'm all for it.
Give us a sprinkler rain at 2010. I'm sure we'll all be enjoying Australia.
Won't mind that.
Now, our final topic of the night is the EA Sports takeover of Codemasters. Now, as we know, EA Sports is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, gaming company out there right now. They have subsidiaries such as Rockstar and 2K. Now they've got Codemasters, who haven't got the best track record in making games. It's a reported $1.2 billion fee that they've paid to take over it. I think it's actually a very good thing for the F1 fan base, because it means that now F1 is finally, it's going to be a mainstream game because of who is the publishers.
Definitely. I think you look at the success of FIFA. Obviously, the sales-wise, I think the game, obviously, I think we're all in agreement that it's not a very good game. But the fact is, the way they've made FIFA such a big, huge franchise. Obviously, they've done the same with obviously NFL. Obviously, I think F1 EA had a license to F1 a good few years ago now, and I believe everyone spoke very highly of those games from back in the day. I think they'll bring, as you said, they'll take F1 into like a mainstream level. I think, as long as they don't kind of saturate it with microtransactions and stuff like that, I'm all for it, because I think it will give them Codemasters the funding they need to actually maybe make a full product for a game.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's a needed benefit. Like Codemasters are kind of taking the franchise as far as they can. They've done with what they've got, they've done a good job. Like, not a spectacular job because there are a lot of issues, but they've done a good job. Considering where the F1 game was, I mean, it took them to 2015 to have the AI that would actually like race you, like F1 2010 to 2014 on console or PC.
They had that trait, didn't they, on like the first lap?
Yeah, they were just
1,000 meters early.
They wouldn't. I mean, they were buggy to start with in 2015, but at least they kind of
they've gotten better and better.
They didn't even have career mode in 2015.
Yeah, there wasn't even one.
Yeah. But with the EA's back in, they can definitely imagine the Frostbite engine. Like the game faces in Codemasters games aren't the best. Imagine the Frostbite engine with F1.
Oh yeah.
We've seen Lewis Hamilton and Daniel Ricciardo already in the FIFA Volta game mode, and they did look
incredible.
Very good. Yeah, especially Hamilton with his hair, just the detail on it.
And you can actually see because he's got like tattoos that go up to the back of his neck as well, and you could see actually the details of the tattoos. Where in F1 it's a bit
vague.
Obviously they'll have their the turtleneck of the race suit on, but Hamilton, you can see a bit of he has like wings, I think, at the back of his neck or something. You can see that sometimes when he's turning around, and you never really get to see that detail in the F1 game. It's sort of it's like a plastic model that they've used.
I mean, they are wearing a helmet most of the time, but
obviously they're helmet most of the time. It's like when they're on the podium or something.
Yeah, I know. Obviously,
yeah.
It's not. The main thing is
the racing,
the content, and the AI, and different kind of features. And I think as well. I think they said that they're going to keep, the current team of Codemasters. They're not going to try and in the short term, take too much away from it. They're just going to allow extra funding and extra manpower,
which is
which is good, because Codemasters currently running out of a shed in Birmingham. They don't have massive resources. They can't compete with these huge companies. And I think as long as they don't, we've seen their trajectory. Like, they've brought F2 cars in. They've done My Team. Like that's quite revolutionary. And with Liberty, sort of allowing, being more open, I think it is quite exciting.
And also EA will have, pretty sure with the driver transfers, they just did it. Codemasters did it without any conversations. They didn't
really tell the teams.
Whereas EA would be able to. They'd have the financial resource to be able to do stuff like that. Obviously, it's not relevant now because they've done it and it's fine. But
and as well, I think we'd see for when you're making your driver or whatever, or your team, there'll be a lot more customizable options. Such as when you're making your say a pro clubs player, you can design everything for the face and then you can wear certain types of boots and have certain types of socks. So that there's that chance, that when you're designing your team, you can have a certain brand that makes your race suits instead of it just being like a Codemasters base thing. You could actually have Puma or Alpine Stars, which I think is it just adds that extra little bit that it's just been missing from Codemasters games.
The little details,
And I think just with the money that they can put in, they can just improve the overall quality of the game in terms of bugs. They can maybe laser scan tracks because they've been focusing really on trying to make the game more, not esports level, but more of an actual driving game, because it's still at that weird stage where it's like you can have really quick players competing on a gamepad compared to someone who's got a £500 wheel. I'm not saying that it should like alienate pad players, but I think that with EA there could be that option for a simulated style of steering for a wheel that actually makes you have the characteristics of a car more than what it has now.
It definitely gives them more flexibility and that can only be a good thing for the future.
Definitely, and it's not just F1 as well that it affects. Codemasters, they have WRC under their control as well, which that'll only improve their games for WRC. And I think as well they have other series, such as I think the British touring cars are thinking of going with Codemasters or something.
No, I think that's with motorsport games. They're the ones who do the NASCAR games, I think. But I do see what you mean. I've got a really strong portfolio of like subtitles under their belt that I think that EA will only help them to sort of grow on that, really. Especially things like the Dirt series. Like
really... the Dirt series is the Codemasters staple. It's been there since the start. It's their main thing. And EA, they have their own. They got Need for Speed. Now, Need for Speed is probably on par with Forza as the biggest game, like driving game in the world. Would you like agree with that? It's been there since like the start of consoles. It's just fun. You can get into your favorite supercar. You can get into your favorite supercar and drift around the city. There's not really much games that you can do that. And it's just good for casual stuff. So there's that chance that it can bring F1 to a mass audience while also making it just that little bit more niche, if that makes sense. It's only just going to get better. I don't see you have that argument of the microtransactions, pay bundles and stuff like that. I don't see how that's really going to affect an F1 game, which already has microtransactions anyway. You can buy certain types of helmets and gloves already that will cost you real life money. So I don't see it as an evil in that regard because Codemasters is already doing it.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that an unanimous agreement that EA taking over Codemasters can only be a good thing for the future of the F1 game franchise.
Oh, definitely, without a doubt.
Yeah, so that has been the first episode of the Paddock Talk Podcast. Hopefully you all enjoyed. We will try to get better as the weeks and months go on, and hopefully you stick with us as we embark on this new journey. This should be going out on YouTube, but I'm not sure what other platforms we plan to release it on yet. That you'll see in the description if you check the YouTube video, and then we'll be more clearer what platform it's out on in the future. Right now it's in a preliminary phase. But I've been Taylor, and thanks to Tom, Joel, and Nat for joining me today.
Yeah, tune in next time.